And so here's the reality we see throughout Scripture, the rest of the book of Acts, you can go through. Saul's one assignment is to share the goodness of God, that Jesus is in fact the resurrected Son of God, the Messiah, and the God that he once worshiped, the dead religious God that he worshiped, was a lie. And that came at a lot of risk and a lot of confusion. Disciples are like, is this genuine? He was coming to kill us, and now he's worshiping Jesus. What happened? And then the other people are like, what, you turned on us? So it was like a lose-lose situation for Saul, but he knew his assignment. He knew he was named Paul. And now we see him living into that reality, that he's not ashamed of the gospel. He's not ashamed to preach Jesus in all the places he goes. And so I think the thing that we're left with is, well, what about all the people that rejected his message? What about all the Jewish, Pharisaic people, and even some Gentiles and other people? What about all of them that did reject him? Because there was plenty of people that rejected his message. And so we might ask ourselves the same thing. Okay, what if I'm obedient like Ananias, like Paul? What if I'm obedient like them and I get rejected? That they reject the message that I bring. So part of the story, the scooter story, remember? Like 15 minutes ago? Yeah, you remember the scooter story, right? So there's part of, you're like, yeah, duh, that was 15 minutes ago. We have attention span, or you know what I'm trying to say. I'm losing my words now. And so part of the story I actually didn't share was the engagement that I had with the store owner. So when I went to the pawn shop, I had a conversation with that guy, and like first things out of his mouth was like, oh, yeah, so you're the pastor. I'm like, oh my gosh, how does he know I'm a pastor? Like, that's not like a badge of honor. I try to go into every place and know. I'm like, what is he going to hold against me? So he had Facebook creep me. Anyone do that before you go meet somebody you haven't known? Yep, you liars, those who aren't raising your hand, you do that. I do that. And so he Facebook creeped on me and saw that I was a pastor at Frontline. And so he said, yeah, so you're a pastor, right? And I said, yep. And we were talking a little bit, and I said, yeah. I said, are you a Christian? Like, are you a believer? And he said, I believe in Jesus, and I believe in Buddha. I was like, that's a weird way to worship Jesus, unfaithfully. 0 gods before God. I'm pretty sure we're against that here. I didn't say that. That was in my head. So he says it, and then I walk out of there not thinking much about it. And the moment I sat in my car seat, I just felt like the Lord said so clear as day, Cody, you know what you must do. Cody, you know what you must do. I was like, dang it, I have a job description now. The Lord's asking me to share the gospel with this man. So I was like, all right. So I went home that week. I was praying about it, praying for him. And I happened to stumble, in my morning devotions, I was in 2 Kings, and it was about Elisha and the worship of Baal and Yahweh. And so there was an altar constructed, and they were having a competition of who the real God was, Baal or Yahweh. And so there was a line in there that I read. And what's so funny is I was praying to God. I was like, I don't know what to say to this guy. God, give me words. And I read this line. It said, Elisha said, at what point are you going to stop teetering between two gods and actually have an allegiance with the one God, Yahweh? I was like, dang. I was like, it's Buddha, not Baal, but close enough. And so God had given me that scripture. And so I knew what I had to do. I started praying for him. So I show up to the pawn shop, and, what I was hoping for is an empty building. That's not what I got. It was like, man, this place is packed. So I'm like, great, now I got to be this weird pastor coming in, sharing the gospel, so cliche. So I walk in, and we're having a conversation, and there's like people like leaning into our conversation all around. Like they were listening. I'm like, dang it, like I'm freaking out, I'm shaking, I'm scared. So we're talking, we go back and forth, we're having some small talk. And then I asked him, I said, hey, there was something you said when we met last that really, really struck me. And I'm curious to know what about it. I said, you mentioned that you worship Jesus and Buddha. And he's like, yeah. Like he wasn't surprised. He's like, yeah. And he went into a long explanation that I didn't really understand, but I was like, okay. And so what I began to do is I said, hey man, I know this is weird, but here's what I read in my devotions. I felt like God wanted me to read second. And before I could even get the words out, he's like, yep, I know what you're going to say. You're going to read that whole thing about two guys. It was like, yeah, well, I'm trying to be faithful, so just let me finish what I'm saying. So I share it with him, and we talk a little bit, And it got to the point where he just kind of wanted to argue with me. And once it got to that conversation, I think something that's true and I think we need to know is Jesus can fight for himself. He doesn't need you to convince anybody. He just wants you to be faithful and share. Now, whether or not that person rejects your message, that's on them. You still go home a faithful witness to the Lord. And so in that moment, I just kind of let that go. I said, yeah, my work's done. I told him exactly what I believe. I invited him into that. He said, nope. And I just walked out. You want to know what I was expecting? Oh man, I'm going to walk into this pawn shop and I'm going to preach Jesus and everybody's going to lay on the floor and give their life to him and I'm going to walk out the hero. Let's go. I'm ready. That's not what happened. And oftentimes that's not the point anyways. The hero of the story is always Jesus. And so I want you to know that there's a suffering that's redemptive, and God was teaching me that. And so when I went home and he didn't give his life to Jesus, the story actually continues. It wasn't until like a month after that moment where I found out the scooter was stolen. So I had reached out to him and said, hey man, scooter's stolen. He emails back, yep, I know. He's like, the scooter was stolen. I bought it from somebody that stole it. I didn't steal it. I'm like, okay, that might be true, but it doesn't matter. I was like, and I'm trying to negotiate with him. I'm like, will you meet me in the middle? Can you reimburse me? Like, I gave, the scooter to the cops. I don't have it anymore, so I'm out the money I paid for it. And he's like, nope. Would that make any of you mad? I was furious. Did you see how cool that thing was? It wasn't cheap. I spent a penny on that bad boy, and now I had nothing. And so if I'm honest with you, over these months, I was just mad. I was angry at him. Anytime I thought about him, it was just like, ugh. And I had a lot of this tension and suffering as I thought about him. And so as I was preparing to preach this sermon, the question I asked God is, well, how am I faithfully being a co-sufferer with you for the gospel? And Jesus was like, well, here's where you're not doing it. I was like, oh, I didn't even think about it. And it wasn't condemning. He didn't condemn me for it. He just said, hey, here's your assignment. And what I felt like God asked me to do is just to pray for this guy. And the amount of weight that fell off my shoulders was like an elephant off my back. I felt so much compassion for him. I actually felt sorry for him. I was like, man, God, I got everything. Who cares about the stinking scooter? I have Jesus. This guy has half of Jesus, or at least he thinks. And in that moment, there was so much renewal in me. And I think God might invite you into that as well. And so there's a suffering that's empty. It's what I was doing with withholding prayer, withholding the gospel from that guy. And then there's a suffering that's redemptive that God's teaching me how to do right now. So Paul, literally what he's doing is he's inviting us. He said this in scripture. He said, do the work of an evangelist. An evangelist is a witness of the gospel. It's what Paul was doing all throughout scripture. Everyone he came in contact with, he was sharing the good news of Jesus. That's our call. Contextually, that was for him. Today, that's for us as well. That we might share the gospel with somebody. Are you willing to love like Jesus and suffer like Jesus?
Hey, thanks for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope it made an impact on your life somehow. And if it did, don't forget to like or subscribe or share it on social media with your friends as well. We always love seeing you, and remember that you can join us live every single Sunday. So hope to see you there.